Rat Subterranean News, 1968-69. We lived in the eye of a political and cultural hurricane, the most intense period for the movement. Rat made news as well as reported it. So we'll make a series of videos from my direct experience, because people have all kinds of theoretical knowledge, but I happen to be lucky enough to be in the civil rights movement, North and South. And we're going to divide this into North and South because they're parallels, but we've got to talk about a number of different subjects like SNCC, Black Panthers, and it's easier to divide them up into bits that we can consume. The race is such a difficult subject because we live in a very fragmented society, and there are cops that shoot people and are not prosecuted, and there are young people that basically are like Brazilians or something, are unaware of race and have a variety of friends. And of course our culture is blending, and in a century or two will be much more blended, and those divisions will be much more difficult. On another hand, the racism that we see in police departments, which is a culture, lives. I'll tell one quick story. I lived in Shreveport, Louisiana recently, and I partners in a talent agency, Acclaimed Talent, which is very successful, and they were making lots of movies. A black rapper came to see me, and he was fascinating. His name was Raven or Domain.
Holla at your boy, holla at your boy. It's Friday evening, waking up look like the Grim Reap. Hadn't had no sleep from the previous day's late night creep. But I best to get up, then get my stroll on if I suppose to catch.
Skinny guy that looked like Snoop Dogg. They had produced a video that they sold at concerts and taken in over $100,000. He told me it was Homie and Juliet, and I thought, oh, that's odd. Domain, you're doing something about homosexual. No, homies, you idiot. Oh, right. It was homies. Anyway, so we're sitting and drinking one evening on my porch, and Domain was about 30 and said, "You're the first white man I ever talked to." And I said, "What?" Now this guy got no radio play, no newspaper mentions, but if he was going to do a concert, they would get a field and a flatbed truck, and thousands of people would come. In the black community, the waitresses, "Oh, Domain." So he was a real artist and highly recognized and invisible in the white culture of Shreveport. So he tells me he's never talked to a white man. I said, how is that possible? And what he meant is that in his entire life, people are polite. "Good day, Domain." "Good day, sir." You know, that kind of talk, but no conversation in his entire life in Shreveport with a white person. That is deep racism, and he was maybe the most famous artist in that city. Of course, the white people didn't know it, but the outside world knew it. And so that's the kind of really ingrained racism that's so hard to overcome. It's interesting, the idea of race is a cultural construct, and different things have been called races before. So we have had the Negro race or the black race or something, which doesn't fit at all with DNA. Interestingly, the Irish, when they first came to America, were considered a race. They had separate facilities for Irish, and they were described as sub-Europeans with not high mental faculties and other characteristics that were later ascribed to blacks. So It's interesting to know, you of Irish descent, that you at one time were considered a race that should be subjugated. Just like today we have Muslims should be oppressed, or other groups that come to America. And there is no such thing as a black race, but various groups from Africa that we're all part of. People are often confused because the rhetoric in the North was not racist and the South was highly racist. But the system was the same, and when I was in New York, I saw the patterns of segregation, even oppression economically, were the same in the North and the South. The Southerners were not so good at media, and so they talked about the niggers are being upset by the outside agitators. Men in the North, they would say, we need to enhance the education of Columbia University, and so we're expanding around our campus, which meant they were tearing down black homes to build a gym. Slavery was so deeply embedded in American culture because it served economic interest. People in Africa sold slaves. Africans sold Africans. They were brought to the United States, and have obviously, in the Southern economy with cotton and other agricultural crops that they wanted to export, they needed cheap labor. The North had an industrial system and was very interested in cheap labor, but they weren't dependent on slave labor. They just liked slaves to keep the general wage scale lower. Prior to the Civil War, it's interesting, the church communities in the North, the Quakers and many others, were really virulently against the idea of owning another person as property. Slavery is simple. A human being is equal to a suitcase. And interestingly, like here in Texas, there were more anti-slavery societies in 1850 than in Illinois, for example. The Germans that came here in the hill country that were yeoman farmers were progressive. We should remember that in the Civil War, millions of Northerners went to war. At some point it was clearly about slavery, and hundreds of thousands of people died to end that system. So it wasn't like the whole nation was racist and whites approved. Millions gave their lives to end it. In the South, it was economic, and there's certain places like Jones County, Mississippi, where people declared, poor whites declared themselves independent from the Confederacy. Another place was Wynn County, Louisiana, which declared itself the free state of Wynn. And of course, historically, South Louisiana, in the Bayou country down there, was independent. So there are many stories about whites seceding from the Confederacy because they didn't want to go fight for the planter class. And the planter class wrote into the laws an exemption: if you paid so much money, you didn't have to go to war. You could buy yourself out. Highly unpopular. At the end of the Civil War, even though slavery was ended, the system was back in place very quickly. There were efforts like bringing Chinese workers in to build the railroads. And in Mississippi, for example, a great number of Chinese were brought in to work as indentured servants. And it didn't work because the Chinese came as communities, and as soon as they marshaled a little capital, they would set up their own grocery stores, their own funeral homes, etc. And they couldn't be oppressed. The blacks, when they were brought from Africa, families were split up, linguistic groups were split up, and so it was very hard for them to unify and rebel.
Turn me around, can.